Chapter 2101. Daisy turned her head around and walked toward Sunny. He's gone out with Cameron since early in the morning. I wonder if the matter has been resolved. Sunny sat on the rocking chair, picked up a palm fan, and fanned himself with it. Don't worry. There is nothing that Cam can't solve. Not to mention that your brother is there with her. She'll be fine. Daisy dragged a tiny stool along and sat down beside him. That's not the mindset that you should have. Even if Cameron is very strong, you can't always feel so at ease with her. After all, she's still a lady, so no matter how capable she is, you still need to worry about her. He was startled and stared at Daisy. However, he was at a loss for words for a while. He had been raising Cameron like a son all these years. Cameron had always lived up to his expectations and could handle many things independently, so he tended to sometimes forget that she was his daughter. From his perspective, there was nothing that she could not accomplish. Even if she were to cause trouble in society, she had always been able to settle the matter by herself without needing him to take any action. He was really ashamed to have to be reminded by Daisy of the fact. But when he was being taught a lesson face to face by a young girl, Sunny felt embarrassed, so he cleared his throat. Are you blaming me for not caring for my daughter? She lowered her head. You're the one who said it yourself. I didn't say that. Sunny's eyes widened. He did not expect Daisy to act so unorthodoxly. However, he fanned himself and did not lose his head. Forget it, I'll admit that it's all my fault. I'm not someone who would argue with a young girl. Immediately after saying that, Sunny looked around the courtyard and asked, Is your brother married? Daisy did not think much about it and replied almost subconsciously, Of course not. Waylon is still single and on the market. Sunny nodded, pretending to be surprised. Your brother is a fine man. Is it even normal for him not to have a girlfriend? After all, he's the eldest son of the Goldman. Not to mention his outstandingly handsome appearance and his tremendous capability, men like this are popular no matter where they go. Thinking back to when I hadn't lost my hair nor grown fat, I was a charming and suave man too. And because of that, I had been together with several women before I met Cameron's mother. It's absolutely normal for a man to get together with several women before marriage. However, after getting married and forming a family, a man has to settle down and take on his responsibility in the family. No matter how attractive the women who surround him are, it can never be compared to the warmth that he can obtain from his wife at home. Daisy thought about it for a while. Maybe it's because Waylon is way too excellent, so a woman worthy of him hasn't appeared yet? Oh? Sunny raised his eyebrows. Then what kind of woman do you think is worthy of your brother? How should I describe it? Daisy thought meticulously. In addition to being gentle, considerate, and kind, the woman will also have to be better than Waylon. The corner of Sunny's mouth twitched. Gentle, considerate, and kind, none of these words can be found on her. And she has to be even more excellent than him? How much better must the lady be then? The lady has to at least be able to handle Waylon. If she can't do so, Waylon will be the one who has all the say in their marriage. He'll play tricks on the lady from time to time, and he's as sly as no lace. No one can hide anything from him. Sunny returned to his senses. Are you badmouthing and complaining about your brother? Daisy raised her gaze and smiled. Although you have a good impression of Waylon, I don't want Cameron to suffer. I also wish to help you make a match out of the two of them, but what if Cameron were to suffer great losses from being with Waylon in the future? We'll be blamed for the rest of our lives. Sunny was astounded for a moment and then laughed out loud heartily. This young lady knows exactly what's on my mind. Sunny picked up the teacup. How about we place a bet on this matter? Chapter 2102. Daisy blinked. What do you want to bet on? Sunny looked at her and explained, We'll bet on who out of the two of them will admit to taking a fancy to the other party first. I'm placing all my bets on your brother. He'll be the one to admit his fall first. Whoever loses has to agree to one condition for the other party. How about this? Daisy agreed to the bet without hesitation. As evening approached, Cameron ordered a table of scrumptious dishes at Yuzu Villa and asked the waiter to open a bottle of Merlot. She also hired a pianist to play some music in the private room to add to the fun. Seeing that Waylon had not even taken a bite for quite some time, Cameron lifted her gaze. You've been running around all day. Aren't you hungry? He stared at the wine in his glass. I'm fine. She poured herself a glass of wine too. How should I put this? You've done me a big favor today, so allow me to buy you a meal. He lifted his gaze casually and let off a faint smile. I've been asked to run errands for you. If this meal isn't on you, do you expect me to pay for it myself? Cameron tooted. Am I such a person to you? My old man asked you to tag along because he knew that there was something that required your help. Besides, I only asked you to run an errand for me. I guess someone as noble as you won't get into all the details with someone as petty as me. Waylon pinched the foot of the wine glass, shook it lightly, and smirked without saying a word. He could see that Cameron had done so on purpose today. As for the reason, it was most likely because he had guessed her identity. Cameron downed her glass first as a gesture of respect. She then realized that he not only did not eat anything but also did not drink the wine and frowned. Mr. Goldman, are you afraid that I've spiked the wine or food in order to kill you? Is it necessary for him to be so vigilant of me? His expression was unchanged. You wouldn't do that. I'm sure of that. She picked up her silverware and grabbed herself a piece of spare rib. But getting me drunk is another story. You might leave me on the street after I get drunk in order to get revenge on me. She froze for a split second. In fact, it's true that I plan to get him drunk, but I'm not planning to leave him on the street in order to make a fool of himself. I would at most get him drunk, then leave him in some random woman's arms and take pictures of his gaffe. Since Waylon knew her identity, Cameron had been very wary of him. Although he was not an enemy, she still felt uncomfortable about the fact that he knew about her real identity. I've always been the one who possesses the goods on somebody else. No one has ever managed to reverse the situation. I didn't watch out for Daisy because she's pure and simple, but Wayne is different, especially someone as scheming and inscrutable as him. So, if he were to threaten me with my real identity, at least I would have these photos in my possession to fight back, wouldn't I? She chuckled and put her silverware down. Mr. Goldman, do you really think of me as someone so evil? Waylon stared at her, and his gaze looked profound and unfathomable. The fact that I know about your true identity makes you anxious and watchful of me. Will you let me off without doing anything beforehand? Cameron summoned the waiter and asked him to remove the wine. Then let's just eat and not drink. This would be fine now, wouldn't it? Waylon smirked and did not even utter a single word. Cameron noticed that Waylon basically did not touch any of the spicy dishes during the meal, so she raised her eyebrows. Do you not eat spicy food? He responded with a faint hum, I prefer lighter flavors. That's a pity. She tooted. Yuzu Villa is famous for its Korean-American fusion cuisine. If you don't eat spicy food, doesn't that mean that you won't be able to enjoy a few of the dishes? Waylon moved slowly. It's no big deal, as long as the food can fill me up. The corners of Cameron's lips twitched. What a boring man. I really don't understand what makes my father like him so much. I'm his biological daughter, but Wayne feels more like his son than I do ever since he arrived here. Chapter 2103. Waylon noticed her unusual gaze and raised his gaze. What's wrong? Cameron put down her silverware and asked bluntly, what kind of benefits have you given to my father? He narrowed his eyes. Benefits? What else could it be? You're an outsider, but he values you so much that he allows you to interfere in the Southern clan's affairs. Waylon sneered immediately. If that's your concern, what about Nolace? Cameron choked on her own words. Can I even compare the two of you on the same level? The relationship that Nolace and my father have is at best, profit-driven. Even if I've taken his check, unilaterally, our relationship can only be considered as an alliance formed based on mutual benefits. Not to mention, my father doesn't allow Nolace to interfere in the affairs of the Southern clan. So how can I not wonder if Wayne has secretly bribed my father behind my back? Wayland took a sip of soup calmly and slowly. Are you saying that I've paid Mr. Southern Sr. only to make him get you to order me around? Cameron was rendered speechless. That seems to make sense. Perhaps I've overthought everything. Wayland glanced at her. The person that you should look out for isn't me. After all, I don't hold any grudge against the Southerns. She smiled. You're right. They did not return to the Southern residence until 7 sharp in the evening. Sonny was playing chess with Daisy in the living room. He had guessed that they would be eating out, so he did not cook them dinner. You've come home? Yes, in order to thank Mr. Goldman for his help, I treated him to a meal. Cameron crossed her arms and turned around after saying that. I'm going upstairs already. Daisy and Sonny exchanged gazes, and she got up too. Mr. Southern Sr., then I'll head back to my room as well. Sonny did not stop her. Looking at the two ladies going upstairs one after the other, Wayland squinted slightly. Sonny commented at this time, your sister's skills in playing chess are pretty good. He retracted his gaze. It's all thanks to my mother. Why don't you play a game with me? The night is still young. Sonny put away all the remaining chess pieces and rearranged them. Wayland walked up to the chessboard and sat down. My skills aren't as brilliant as Daisy's, so I might make a fool out of myself. Sonny waved his hand. That's okay. At this moment, upstairs, Cameron had just finished taking a shower. She put on a nightgown and sat down in front of the dressing table, applying her face cream and moisturizer. When she heard a knock on the door, she guessed who it was immediately. She got up, walked to the door, and opened it. Daisy was standing at the door. Cameron turned sideways to let her in. What brings you here looking for me in the evening? Daisy walked to the couch and sat down intuitively. Her posture looked upright and elegant, and she giggled. It's nothing much. It's just that I'm bored by myself. Cameron chuckled. So you've come to my room to stay with me? She nodded and changed the subject of the conversation. Have you guys settled the matter at the Chamber of Commerce? It's just a group of people who want to take advantage of the opportunity to cause us trouble. Cameron walked to the couch, sat down, and poured herself a glass of water. It's just a trivial matter. Daisy lowered her gaze. What do they want? Cameron paused and raised her gaze. Why are you so interested in it? I'm just curious, she responded. What do they want? It's, of course, what Fabio wants. The serpents have turned to him for protection and shelter, so if they can annihilate the Southern clan for him, the serpents will then be the greatest gang under Fabio of all time. Cameron drank the water. Daisy supported her cheeks with her hands. Isn't there any way to get rid of them for good? Cameron paused and said nothing. It's not that I've not thought about this option. The serpents were originally working on our territory, and I didn't make a move on them only because of the relationship between my father and Joken's father. Now that they've turned to Fabio and gotten his protection, it's a little troublesome to just get rid of them directly. Daisy stared at her and seemed to think of something. But Joken Serrano's body hasn't been found yet, has it? So is there a possibility that he's still alive? Chapter 2104. Cameron was stunned for a split second and stared at Daisy. Do you really think that he's still alive? Isn't it strange that his body hasn't been found? She lowered her gaze. Joken is Florence's father. It's unusual for her not to even try to find out the cause of her father's death and jump straight to the conclusion that her father is dead, isn't it? Cameron thought about her hypothesis for a moment and then chuckled. What you just said does make sense too. If Manuel is the one who killed Joken, there must be a way for him to dispel Florence's suspicion. However, Manuel would certainly make another move if she were to find out something about the incident. She got up. Alright, you should go to bed early. I'll bring you out tomorrow. Daisy was startled, then laughed out loud. I don't think I'll be of great help when I go out with you. Why don't I ask Waylon to accompany you? Seeing Cameron's suspicious gaze, Daisy explained hurriedly, what I mean is that the more people there are, the more strength you'll have. Cameron responded, you do whatever you want. Daisy left the room happily. Cameron crossed her arms and watched as the door closed slowly, cutting off Daisy and the corners of her lips twitched. I'm interested to see what this girl is up to. The next day, Daisy brought Waylon along and accompanied Cameron out of the manor. The three came to the Southern Chamber of Commerce, and Mahina reported that they had let go of the security guard to Cameron. Cameron sat on the couch. Did you send someone to tail him? Mahina nodded. I've already sent someone to monitor him from the shadows. If Manuel wants to get rid of him to silence him, he'll definitely not live to see another day. Cameron picked up the teacup. Send some people to find out more about Joaquin Serrano too. Mahina was caught off guard and confused. But Joaquin is already, Cameron raised her gaze. If Joaquin is really dead, where's his body? If no corpse has been found, it means that he's more likely to be alive. Mahina replied, I'll send someone to look into that now. Wait. Cameron stopped her and added, I think Manuel and his men are also investigating this matter, so remind them to act more cautiously so that they won't get discovered. Since Joaquin's body had not been found, Manuel was probably the most worried person. Daisy really reminded her last night. Joaquin might actually still be alive. Otherwise, a dead man wouldn't be able to make Manuel feel threatened at all. Since I was able to trick him into believing me, it means that even he isn't sure whether Joaquin is truly dead. Daisy suddenly asked, can I go to the commune to see Nolés? Cameron glanced at her and put down the teacup. You can't even hold your urge to meet your husband back for a second longer as soon as you get out of the house? She smiled. I just want to go and meet him. Maybe Nolés would know something about this. Cameron got up slowly. Okay, Wayne will bring you there. No, I can go there by myself. She rejected the suggestion directly and quickly left the Southern Chamber of Commerce. Cameron watched as Daisy left the scene, then shifted her gaze onto Waylon, and just so happened to meet his gaze. She laughed out loud. It seems that you're nowhere as important as Nolés in your sister's heart, huh? Waylon's eyes moved, and he lowered his gaze. What makes you say that? She shrugged. She brought you out and then left you behind. Waylon gave off a faint smirk and said nothing. His expression was obvious that he had realized that this would happen earlier on. When Daisy asked me to accompany her, she didn't tell me we'd be coming out with Cameron. Her ulterior motive is so obvious now. A subordinate rushed into the Southern Chamber of Commerce in a hurry and stood aside respectfully. Young master. Cameron looked at him. What's the matter? Our people have been keeping an eye on the security guard all night, and nothing has happened so far. Do you want us to continue monitoring him? He asked. Chapter 2105. Cameron frowned subconsciously. Is Manuel not planning to tie up the loose end? Or is he planning something else? At that moment, Waylon received a text message from Sadai, and his expression became slightly serious. Crap. Manuel's target is Daisy. Cameron was startled. What? She immediately told her subordinate, send someone to the commune now. Daisy grabbed a cab to the commune. Her original purpose was to create an opportunity where Waylon and Cameron could be left alone. Her presence was absolutely insignificant. Given Waylon's capability, he would definitely be able to help Cameron solve the problem, so Daisy's presence would only make her the third wheel. She looked out the window, noticed something, and frowned. Sir, the route that you're taking doesn't seem right, does it? The driver did not answer her and abruptly pulled the car over on the side of the road and unlocked the door. Daisy quickly pushed the door open and got out of the car. At this time, the men who came out from all around surrounded her and blocked all her way out. "Miss Vanderbilt, where are you going? Why don't you come with us, without putting up a fight?" Daisy stepped back vigilantly. "Why should I go with you? I don't even know you." The man snorted. "That's not up to you to decide." The men then started to approach her. A whip lashed the body of one of the approaching men, and before they could react, she kicked the man who was nearest to her. Seeing that she was resisting, the man yelled, "Get her!" The men put on their game faces and started attacking her. A fist came at her, but she turned sideways in place, instantly twisted the leather whip around the man's arm, and kicked him in the stomach with her knee. Another man attacked her from behind at this moment, but she dragged the man whom she had entangled in the whip to block the attack. She then pulled the whip off the man's arm, lifted her legs, and kicked the two of them down together. Two other men pounced at her, intending to snatch the whip. However, she flung the whip out and struck the back of one of the men's hands. The man retracted his hand in pain while another man restrained her from behind. Daisy instantly grabbed his arm, threw him over her shoulder, and kicked him in his crotch hard. The man crouched on the ground in pain, covering his crotch. Daisy broke free from their siege and was about to flee when a man pulled out a dagger and rushed up to her from behind. Daisy turned her head and realized that the dagger was already a few inches away. At that moment, a silhouette appeared out of nowhere, dragged her into his arms, and kicked the dagger off the hand of the man behind her. The man was stunned by the sudden attack and staggered 2 steps backward. And before he could react to the abrupt turn of the tide, he had been kicked and landed almost 4 feet away. Daisy was astonished and looked up at the man in a mask. Everything about him felt familiar. She was shocked. "Knowles?" Knowles pushed her aside and rushed into the group of men to fight them. Knowles punched so hard and fiercely that they were unable to fight back. Soon, they lost their numbers advantage and upper hand and had to retreat from the scene. One of the men picked up the dagger on the ground and assaulted him. Daisy swung the whip immediately, wrapped it around the sharp blade in the man's hand, and pulled the dagger out. At this time, Knowles gave him a back kick, and the force of his feet hit the man's head, causing him to drop to the ground almost instantly. He could no longer get back up. "Mr. Beck." Jake arrived in time with some men. That scene was a mess. He saw all the men rolling on the ground in pain, all of them injured to varying degrees. Knowles looked at these men and said, "I'll leave them to you." Jake nodded. "Okay." Knowles walked toward Daisy, took her into his arms, and took her into the car. In the car, Daisy removed his mask while he held her wrist, pulled her into his arms, and said with a hoarse voice, "Thank God you're all right." Daisy sunk into his arms and lowered her gaze. "How did you know that I would be in danger?" Chapter 2106. "Waylon told me." "Waylon?" Daisy looked up at him in surprise. "Isn't he at the Chamber of Commerce with Cameron?" Knowles looked at her while touching her pale face, because that must have scared her. "Yes, but he got intel that Manuel was targeting you, so he informed me." She would have probably been hurt if he had arrived a little later. Daisy put her hand on his hand and pressed her face into his rough hand. "I could have avoided it." Knowles chuckled. "But I lost my mind when I saw that you were in danger." She whispered, "Weren't you afraid that you would be stabbed?" He kissed her forehead, and a tear fell while he smirked. "Didn't you save me? You're getting stronger too." Daisy pushed him away. "Don't praise me." Jake opened the door and saw them, then looked away. "Mr. Beck, I'm taking these people away." Knowles nodded. Meanwhile, Waylon drove over to the commune to meet Knowles. Cameron sat on the passenger's side, resting her head on her hand while looking out the window. Knowles probably got there on time. Waylon frowned. Hopefully, Cameron turned to look at him. Why was Daisy Manuel's target? There was no reason for him to attack her. Waylon's face was dark. Someone else might have been behind this. Cameron was shocked. Someone behind Manuel? Waylon looked into the rearview mirror and saw 2 cars behind them. I think we're in trouble. Cameron looked into the mirror and clicked her tongue. How's your driving? Waylon stepped on it. The cars followed closely, and one of them rushed forward and rear-ended them to make them stop. Waylon turned the steering wheel, and the car moved to one side. He swerved in front while Cameron grabbed onto the handle, her heart pumping fast. They flew toward the countryside while the other cars were close behind. Gunshots echoed, and a bullet hit their back window, forming a crack. Cameron clenched her jaw. They brought weapons. She pulled out a silver Browning from under the seat and loaded it. Waylon looked at her. They probably are carrying guns. We shouldn't get into a gunfight with them. I know that. Cameron rolled down the window, pushed her head out, and shot a few times at the cars behind. The car skidded. The other car started raining bullets on them while Cameron quickly got back into the car. The bullets hit the rearview mirror and the car, and sparks started forming. Waylon looked at the display and frowned. We're running out of gas. Cameron took a deep breath and reloaded. I should have prayed this morning. She continued shooting at the cars behind. Waylon drove into the woods, and the shaking of the car made her almost drop the gun. She sat back in her seat. Why are you driving here? He replied, we need to get rid of the car and hide where there's no road. Can you dodge bullets? Right after they said that the car sputtered and ran out of gas. They couldn't accelerate anymore. They abandoned the car when they saw the cars approaching. The cars behind them stopped, and 8 men with guns started shooting at them. Waylon and Cameron ran into the woods and hid behind the tall grass and trees. Chapter 2107. They kept chasing them, and it was obvious they were after blood. Deep in the woods, the trees grew close to one another. The echo of gunshots startled the birds, which flew in all directions. Cameron and Waylon hid behind a tree that was big enough to cover the both of them. She looked past the branches and saw that a few men were still looking around, but there was nowhere to go in front of them because it was an island, and the edge was a cliff. Waylon waved at her. Give me the gun. I'll distract them. Cameron looked at him. Are you trying to leave me behind? Waylon smiled. You could do that too. Cameron handed the gun to him and took out a dagger from behind. Be careful. It would be tough for me to answer to your family if you die here. He took the gun and loaded it. Cameron gave all the remaining bullets to him. There are 24 in total. It should be enough. He looked at Cameron and didn't say anything, then quickly ran out. The men saw him. They're over there. Waylon continued running into the woods while the man chased after him. Cameron hid behind the tree and heard them run past her. She followed behind them with fierce eyes, dagger in hand. Waylon shot through the woods while the thick tree trunks were in front of him. He darted in and out while a bullet flew past him, scraped the bark, and made a deep cut. Waylon turned and fired 2 shots, which hit someone's leg and shoulder. The men continued to shoot. Chaos ensued in the woods with lots of obstacles. It was impossible to hit Waylon, who was on the move. 2 armed men walked behind them and looked around, but they didn't see someone approach them. When they noticed and were going to turn around, the person had caught up to them and put the dagger to their throats. Just like that, they fell to the ground. Cameron picked up their guns and hid behind a tree. The men who were in front never noticed that the 2 men were missing. Cameron attached a silencer to the gun and rushed toward them while their attention was on Waylon. The 3 men who were at the back quietly disappeared. The man in black turned around when he heard rustling and saw the men who were on the ground, then yelled, "Ambush!" When he turned around, Waylon attacked him from behind. He quickly took away his gun and pushed him to the ground. When the man tried to shoot, a bullet that came from the dark hit his arm, and he fell to the ground in pain. Gunshots rang through the chaos. The 8 men were now down to 2 or 3. One of the men who realized that they had walked into a trap growled, "Damn. They've split up. Kill them." They shot at Cameron, who rolled on the grass while bullets flew past the top of her head. She scoffed and pulled out her dagger. She rolled out from the grass and cut the man's calf. The man yelled aloud in pain. She then kicked him while another man ran toward her. She turned sideways to evade him, then grabbed his gun and hit the man's head with her elbow, kicking his abdomen with her knee. She then hit his temple with her elbow again. The man lost his balance and fell into the bushes. Waylon was fighting another man who seemed to know how to fight. He was fierce with his attacks and attacked weak spots. Waylon could only defend himself when faced with such intense attacks. The man jumped, kicked at a tree, turned, and threw a flying kick at Waylon's head. Chapter 2108. Waylon jumped backward and evaded it, but that man wasn't going to rest. He attacked with his legs, but Waylon blocked him with his arms. The powerful kick numbed Waylon's arms. The man clamored. "You're quite a fighter, huh?" He put on brass knuckles, seeming to want to fight Waylon to death, and charged. Cameron showed up at that moment and grabbed him by his arms. The man quickly got out of her grasp, and a sharp punch flew toward Cameron. She took a step back, but the man did a leg sweep. Cameron grabbed onto the man's shoulder, jumped behind him, and did a back kick. The man raised his arm to block but had to take 2 steps backward to absorb the impact. Waylon and Cameron attacked at the same time, and the man started fighting both of them. They had to work together to barely get the upper hand because the man was really strong. He kept backing up because of their attacks and wiped the blood from his mouth. He then quickly pulled out his gun. Cameron yelled toward Waylon. "Watch out." She threw the dagger that was in her sleeve. Waylon couldn't get out of the way when the gunshot echoed, and the bullet struck his arm. He jerked backward and hit a tree because of the recoil. On the other hand, the dagger landed in the man's throat. His eyes grew big as he fell backward onto the grass. Cameron was drained of energy. She walked toward Waylon while trying to catch her breath, then saw that he was holding on to his arm while his face was pale. Blood was sipping out through his fingers. "Don't squeeze your wound." Cameron moved his hand away and saw a bloody mess under the torn sleeve. Something came to her mind that made her remove her wig. She snapped the rubber band off, and her long, dark hair fell behind her back like a waterfall. She tied the rubber band on his arm on top of the wound to help reduce the blood loss and helped him sit on the ground. Cameron then got up, went through their belongings, found a lighter, and heated the blade. Waylon's face turned paler while he looked at her. Cameron walked over with a bag, knelt next to him, and handed the bag that was used to carry clips. "Bite onto that. I'm going to remove the bullet." He smiled painfully while sweat formed on his forehead. "Are you sure you can do that?" She glared at him. "You can reject my offer if you don't want to keep your arm." Waylon looked at her, took the bag, and put it in his mouth. The moment the dagger cut his arm, Waylon gave a muffled scream while his eyes turned red and the veins on his neck popped up. Beads of sweat started pouring from his head and soaked his face. His arm was in so much pain that he no longer felt anything when the bullet came out. Cameron wanted to get the medical kit from the car. She got up and said, "Wait for me here." She then immediately ran back toward the car. Waylon leaned against the tree. He was groggy while the woods were eerily quiet as if he was alone there. Loneliness and despair started swallowing him. He felt cold as if the heat had left his body. Was he going to die there? Waylon closed his eyes and lost consciousness. Sunny was anxious because they couldn't get in touch with the two of them as if they had disappeared. Daisy was worried as well because she was afraid that something might have happened to them. At that moment, Noles and Mahina walked in. He asked, "How is it?" Mahina replied, "We heard that Cameron and Mr. Goldman were lost around the countryside, and cars were chasing after them with guns." Daisy got up. "Why is this happening? Wasn't she Manuel's target?" Why were Waylon and Cameron in danger too? Chapter 2109. Sonny's face was dark, his hand behind his back curled. Knowles looked at him. I suspect that the perpetrator might have sent out two groups of people at the same time. One group attacked Daisy while the other went for Cameron and Waylon. The people who had attacked Daisy hadn't brought weapons, so it was obvious they weren't trying to take her life, but just to kidnap her. However, the group that had gone after Cameron and Waylon was armed and ready to kill. Sonny clenched his jaw. After the previous incident, Manuel probably wouldn't be daring enough to attack again. Could it be the person behind him? Manuel had hired killers from the Skull Club, but they failed. Now that he had control of the serpents, Fabio would not let him off if he failed again. Knowles raised his brows. What if Manuel didn't plan this? Sonny frowned. Knowles continued. Don't forget the person contacting the serpents in secret. He was shocked. Donald? Don't you find it weird that Manuel suddenly got control of the serpents and even killed his own men to frame the Chamber of Commerce, then tried to take over the Southern Clan's turf? Fabio wanted those places, and if Manuel succeeded, the former would definitely start trusting him. Nala's eyes were drawn to the chessboard. I found out that the person who moved the money was Manuel. This proves that Manuel was the person who was in contact with Donald behind Jokin's back. Donald was controlling everything from behind the scenes, from the murder of Jokin by Manuel to Florence taking over. Now that Manuel has power, he must have fallen into place as one of Donald's pawns. Sonny took a deep breath. Donald. I'm glad I didn't keep him around. He's a disaster. The son of Ryan Matthews was even more cunning and ambitious than he was. Daisy looked down. Donald did all this. Even taking her away was his command. Yes, she had announced her marriage to Knowles after his disappearance. It was impossible that Donald didn't know about that. But as long as Donald didn't know that Knowles was still alive, it would be fine even if she made that announcement. She was too naive to have thought that. If a body was never found, she wouldn't have believed that Knowles was dead, so why should Donald? He might have started to suspect that Knowles was still alive. Sonny asked Mahina to send some people to search the outskirts. If you run into those men, don't make it easy for them. Mahina said, yes, sir. Then she swiftly left. Knowles looked at Daisy, who was falling in despair, walked to her, knelt down, and held on to her slightly cold hands. Don't worry. Cameron and your brother are both great fighters. They should be fine. She didn't know what to say. Knowles pulled her into his arms and played with her hair. He was glad that she wasn't with them just now. He believed that Waylon and Cameron had probably gone into the woods. The attackers had guns and were ready to kill, so if Daisy was there, she might not be able to fend them off. If she was there, Waylon and Cameron would be taking care of her, and they would all be in danger. It started turning dark, and the woods were dark. There was light from afar, but it wasn't very bright in the dark. Waylon woke up and heard the cracking of branches as they burned. He tried to sit up when the jacket that was covering him slid off. Chapter 2110. You're awake. Waylon turned his head and saw Cameron. She was sitting facing the fire, which illuminated her beautiful face. His lips were dry. How long was I out for? 4 hours. She tossed a bottle to his feet. The wound was infected, and you had a fever. There was a medical kit in the car, so I gave you a tetanus shot and some anti-inflammatory medication, so you'll live. He picked the bottle up and twisted the cap open. His movements caused a sharp pain to shoot up his arm. He frowned and drank the water quietly, then looked at the bag next to her. There seemed to be a few cans of food. You have quite a well-packed car. Are you hungry? Cameron picked up a can and handed it to him. This isn't from my car. It's from their car. Waylon took the can but didn't open it. Seeing that he was hesitating, she smirked. Don't worry. I took some. It's not poisoned. He raised his brows and looked at her for a long moment. Thanks. Cameron looked into his eyes and saw how sincere he was. She felt awkward and looked away. Are you still hurting? She had dragged him while he was unconscious. He was too heavy, and she was drained after the fight, so she had taken a lot of breaks, and the road was bumpy. She hadn't paid a lot of attention to where he was bumping into because she was at least not leaving him there. Now that she was thinking of it, she was feeling guilty. Waylon spoke. It's all right. It's not particularly painful. He didn't suspect anything, so Cameron didn't speak. Waylon took just 2 bites of food and didn't seem to have an appetite. He placed the can aside and looked down. His wound had been bandaged and was all right other than the slight pain when he moved. He looked toward Cameron, who sat there quietly, poking the fire with a stick and looking tired. After the fight, she had to take care of him while he was unconscious. If it were someone else, they wouldn't know how to react when facing what they did. She was able to get the bullet out of him calmly and clean the wound. People usually wouldn't do that if they didn't have a bit of medical knowledge. His lips moved. You're really good at dealing with wounds. Cameron looked up. We get a lot of wounds from knives and guns on the East Islands. If we don't learn this, no one is going to save us when we're injured. Waylon smiled. That's true. Cameron looked at her watch. It's getting late, and you should rest. I'll keep watch. I've rested long enough. You should rest. She looked at him. You? The injured one? Waylon tossed the jacket over to her. Are you looking down on me? She caught it and got up, then placed it on the ground. I'll just take a nap. Wake me up if you can't stay awake anymore. She then immediately fell asleep after lying down. Waylon looked at her, smiled, and added wood to the fire. Dawn broke, and the sky slowly turned white. Cameron turned, woke up, and noticed that someone was nearby. She suddenly opened her eyes and was going to attack, but the person grabbed her by her wrists. It's me. She was stunned and sat up to look at Waylon. What's going on? Waylon looked toward the woods and frowned. Someone is coming over. I'm not sure if they're on our side or not. She then heard chatter coming from the woods. It was from a group of people. They wouldn't be able to fight the people off if they turned out to be enemies.